Samuel Getachew. Thank you. All right. So in many ways, we have, I think, saved our, the best for last in some respects. So David Roberts is an absolutely extraordinary speaker. He has been part of Singularity University for a long time now. He brings a very different element and a very special element and a very special guy. So with that, I guess let's get him out here. Please join me in welcoming David Roberts to close the show.
Oh, cool. Okay, great.
Thank you, sir. Welcome.
Thank you. Hey, how's everybody doing? You stay till the end. Very impressive. It's nice to be here. Is there a clicker, maybe? Yeah, I need one of those. Thank you. First, I want to do a happy 10th anniversary. It has been wonderful. How many of you do I know? Okay. Well, thank you for the last sort of 10 years. Can I get down here? Yeah, cool. Thank you for the last 10 years. Many of you, I came to Singularity University in 2010, so I think it's been 9 years. And many of you have become my closest and best friends, so I'm super grateful, very appreciative of that. I love what the university has done over the last 10 years. For those of you that are new to it, I am very much looking forward to the next 10 years because I do think that the impact that we have will continue to change and grow. And I think you will feel it the same way that a lot of the people I feel about here, I think, feel it too. So I feel a little bad because I know some of you came to hear a talk about leapfrogging countries, and I'm not going to quite do that. So I'm going to do, because I realize this is the hardest audience of all for me, because it's the one time where I know that no matter where I gave a talk somewhere in the world, that one of you is here. And so I hate giving a talk that people have heard before. So this talk is completely new. So I don't know how it'll go. Be a little patient with me, because this will be the second time, I think, that I've seen these slides and pulled them together. But I'll tell you this story about when I was a kid. I have two sisters, one older, one younger, a couple years apart from me. And we used to fly down to Puerto Rico in the Caribbean during the holidays. And one of the things we loved to do was swim in the waves, in the ocean, big waves. And, you know, I'm pretty old, so a long time ago, people didn't really watch their kids. So we would just go out in the morning, make our way about a mile down to the beach, and then we'd just hang out and swim all day, and our parents were never there. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy to some of you now, but that's just how things were then. And we went there every holiday, right around December. Every year, year after year, one of my favorite memories of my whole childhood. And what I remembered as an adult was something that I didn't realize then. And it was that my older sister had stopped coming out and swimming with us. And it just didn't click in my head, but I remembered it as an adult, that she was kind of missing. And this was like 5 years ago, and I was sitting at a table with the rest of my family, and we were talking about how we used to swim and love swimming, body surfing in these waves and things. And then I said to her, I said, you know, I remember this time where you didn't do it anymore. And she was like, oh yeah. I was like, what happened? And she was like, oh yeah. You know, you were too young, and so mom and dad didn't let you watch Jaws. But I watched Jaws. And after I watched Jaws, and I don't know if you haven't seen Jaws, I'm guessing that many of you have, but it's this movie about a shark. I mean, as an adult, it's a scary movie. And so we were pretty young kids. And so she saw, I'm sorry, there's no back button, I realized, on this clicker, so I'll hide that photo for you. But after she saw this movie, she never went in the ocean again. Not just then, she never went in the ocean and swam again for the rest of her life. So that was an amazing thing to me, and I didn't understand it at all. And I remember trying to talk her back into it, and I was very unsuccessful. So, time passes. I'll tell you an unrelated story, but they're kind of linked. And my father had passed away in college, and he had this rule, and the rule was, and it was the only thing he was like this about, but he was an anesthesiologist, so he saw a lot of patients come in, and he said, if you ever buy a motorcycle, I'm never going to let you in the house again. So I never bought a motorcycle. But after he passed away in college, somehow this part of my brain forgot that. And so I ended up going out and buying this motorcycle. And I loved it. And I don't know if any of you are motorcyclists, but I know it's dangerous, but it's a wonderful, you're free. You go through the valleys, you feel the temperature changes, you get to smell the flowers. And it's an awesome, awesome experience. And one day while I was in college, it was right about my senior year, I'm riding my motorcycle down Highway 93, and I hear this ticking noise, tick, 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 tick. And I was thinking, is it my engine? Or is it like the car next to me? And I kind of put my head down, and I was listening, tick, 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 tick. And I look up, and the traffic had all stopped, and there was a truck in front of me. And I just leaned back, because I'm dead. I knew it. I just leaned back, and then somehow from leaning back, maybe with the wheel being lighter weight, it had just steered enough that I ended up missing the truck and then flying down stopped traffic at 65 miles an hour. Riding it like this. And I'm like, I didn't die. And I kind of reached forward and I grabbed the wheel. And then I pulled over because I was so frightened by the experience. My hands were shaking. And I had to actually I felt like I was going to throw up. And I had to just sit there for 10 minutes and just wait before I got back on the bike. The next morning, I sold the bike. And I was thinking, I'm never going to ride again. But enough time went by that somehow, 6 years later, I forgot somehow that had happened. And I buy another bike. And 6 months go by. I'm actually still in Massachusetts then. I'm on the highway. I'm going about 65. I take the exit. I'm leaning because I loved leaning into the turns. If you have a bike, I don't know, it's not really something you do on bicycles, but on a motorcycle it feels good to lean deep into the turns because it has big fat tires. And I'm leaning deep into the turn, taking the exit, and it's all gravel. And so I can feel the bike start slipping. And the only thing I can think is either I'm going to let it slip out and wreck for sure, or I'm going to just ride over the edge. But I can't see what's over the edge. And somehow my brain, just in that moment, takes this chance. And I decide I'm going to go over the edge. And I go over the edge, and it sort of pops up, and it's all grass. And the bike lands, bounces, and I kind of skid around, and I'm slowing down, and I stop, and somehow I've survived what would have been either a really brutal, lifelong accident, or I would have died. And so I sell the bike the next day. And I've never bought the bike back. because I was too afraid. I was too afraid of buying the bike back. It was such a vivid memory. So, in the interest of being maybe more intimate than you want to be with me, I'll tell one more story. And several years ago, I got divorced, and I got married, and I found out because of a clearance that I had that I married a Swedish woman, and I found out that I actually wasn't allowed to marry a foreign national until I had first gotten the government's approval. Kind of crazy thing, but everyone in the United States that has this clearance is subject to the same thing. And I remembered that was the true case, but they had briefed me on that like shortly after I got out of college. And it was a long time ago. So it just didn't come up. It never came up. And then right after I got married in Sweden, I got the phone call that said, hey, do you remember that you aren't allowed to marry a foreign national? We got to approve it. And there's just this long pause as my brain is like thinking this thing through and then remembering that this actually happened. And so I'm just like, yeah, I guess I do remember that. So like, oh, okay, well, it's not a problem. We just gotta have to go through a number of investigations. So, the Air Force, the State Department, Immigration Naturalization, the CIA, and another group, we just need to all do a background investigation. I was like, oh, okay, well, how long is that gonna take? And well, we're not really sure. It kind of depends on what your new wife has been doing, but it'll take a month or two. But she can't come into the US until that's all over. So I returned to the US. I was working for the government still at that time, so I needed to come back for the job. A month goes by, 2 months go by, 3 months go by, 4 months go by, 5 months go by, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 months go by. Now, I don't know if you've ever been a newlywed, but 18 months going by, separated, creates a lot of challenges. And in the meantime, I'd been a little bit industrious, and I'd actually found this really beautiful home up in the mountains near Lake Tahoe on a lake with a pool and palm trees and fire pit. I mean, it's like my dream house, and I'm thinking this is just going to be the most awesome house for my new wife. Like, she's just going to love this thing, right? And so finally, when she is allowed into the US, they actually did this whole special thing, and she got to come and see a secret spy satellite and everything else. She didn't care. In fact, she was just pissed off. But I'm like, hey, I got this awesome house. It's in the mountains. She's like, oh, what do you mean it's in the mountains? I was like, oh, it's in the mountains in California. She's like, there's mountain lions in the mountains. I was like, yeah, I'm sure there's mountain lions, there's bears. She's like, no, I'm scared to death of mountain lions. I'm thinking to myself, you're Swedish. She's like, no, I've seen the movies of mountain lions. I was like, I didn't know what she's talking about. I was like, look, I've lived in California for 10 years. Actually, by then it was like 14 years. I was like, 14 years, I've never once seen a mountain lion. In fact, I don't even have a friend that's seen a mountain lion. So she's like, well, I've seen the movies. We can't live in the mountains with mountain lions. I mean, we have kids one day and the rest of this. And so I hear this, and this goes on, no kidding, for like a month. And we're in the home together, but she's like kind of freaked out about the whole thing. And so one night, we're in bed together, sleeping, and around 2 o'clock in the morning, I get woken up, and I hear, sort of just outside the window of the house, these like two deer mating. I'm not really an expert on deer mating, but this goes on for like an hour, okay? And she's like, what is that? I'm just like, it's these deer mating. And then I started banging on the wall to try and like scare him away, but it didn't scare him away. Finally, it ends. We go to sleep. I wake up in the morning, and I pull the curtains aside to look outside at the swimming pool. Is J-Lo here? John Louis here? Okay, I was just telling John Louis this story. That's why I'm telling this story now. And I pull the curtain aside, and I look outside. And right next to the pool is a giant buck. I mean, a huge buck deer, dead, with all of its ribs completely cracked open and all of the guts missing. And I make the tiniest noise because I go, oh. And she heard it. And she says, "What's huh?" I close the curtain. She says, "What's huh?" I was like, "Nothing. What's huh?" Boom, she's out of bed. She's coming to the curtain. I'm just like, whoa, 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 whoa. It's like, what's huh? What's huh? Let me see. And we end up in this like altercation. It's like, like the movie Seven, like what's in the box, It was like a crazy moment. And it really became almost like this physical altercation where I'm trying to like stop her. And finally it got a little bit like too serious. And she gets by and pulls the curtain aside. And there she sees the buck with the ribs all cracked open and the guts missing. And she goes, oh. Now, I'm not saying that was what ended our marriage. But I do believe that there is always a straw that breaks the camel's back. And that was the straw, I think. Because she knows immediately what's happened. I mean, there's no doubt that a lion killed this buck. I mean, I could see her when she was staring at it, remembering, the sound of the deer last night. I mean, putting the pieces together. And I'm thinking to myself, what are the odds of this happening? So I get on the phone, and we're in this, it's, Lake Wildwood. It's this gated neighborhood, and I call up the security, and I'm just like, hey, I think let me describe what happened to you. I described the crime scene. There's like, oh, that sounds like a mountain lion. I was like, oh. It's like, does this happen a lot? He's like, no, we haven't had a mountain lion kill in like 7 years. There's 2,000 homes at Lake Wildwood. I am the one home in 7 years that has a mountain lion kill. And it's Friday of the Halloween. And so Monday's a holiday. So I'm just like, can you guys come and clean this up? Because, I can't like fully explain this whole issue, but it's really important we get rid of this body really quickly. And there's like, oh, it's a holiday. We're not going to be able to come until Tuesday morning. I was like, you got to be kidding me. He's like, yeah, no, we're closed. It's like, listen, I will do pretty much anything if you can just come and get rid of this thing. Look, we can't do it. I was like, $100. He's like, no. It's like $500. He's like, I will give you $1,000 to come by and get rid of this body. He's like, we just can't do it. The guys are already gone. This deer sat outside my house. I know 3 days sounds like a short time, but she is staring out the window for 3 days, looking at it. She never went outside at that house again. Like I had to pull the car into the garage, and then she would get in the garage. And then there were a few times where I pulled it right up to the front door, and then I would open her side of the door, and she would look outside, and then she would like run into the car and close the door. See, what I'm describing in these three experiences matters, and it's going to matter to you. And I know you might not see it right now because you're thinking, what the heck does this mountain lion story have to do with technology or with, disrupting countries or leapfrogging countries or anything else? And it really is connected, and it's connected in just a bizarre way because I've thought about it a lot now. And I've been doing technology stuff for 35 years. But before I go forward, I just want you to think for a moment, because I got this list of, American fears, and it's snakes. Public speaking is number 2. I guess I didn't get that one. Heights. I want you to just think, because my belief is that these aren't the real things. Yeah, I guarantee you that all of you might be afraid of some of these things. But I guarantee you, too, that the most important aspect of your life is held back because of a fear you have. So I want you just for a moment to take a minute and just think, like, what do you really fear? Not these kinds of things. And maybe, you can think about this for your company if you want, think about this for your career or for your personal life, whatever you want. But think about something that you really fear. You're not going to have to tell anybody else. You don't have to write it down. I just want you to get the picture of it in your mind so you know it. And I want to walk you through then some other things. And now I'll get back to the topic we were talking about. But, I've been working on this issue to try and answer this question. Why isn't my country 10 times better? My belief is, as leaders, the most important thing we do is ask really important questions. And for me, especially recently, I've just been thinking, like, why isn't my country 10 times better? Because this is a 10X conference, and I started actually going through and coming up with all the different things, and there really are a lot. I mean, you go through it, and there are a lot of different reasons, and you can go through these in great detail to come up with them all, and it becomes what appears to be a very complex problem. I mean, if it was simple, we would just have a simple answer, right? It's a very complex problem. And so I began to become interested in how does a country get 10 times better? Because if we could figure that out, maybe there's a correlated answer with why something else might not be 10 times better. Like, why isn't your company 10 times better or 10 times bigger? And so I started to look at countries that got 10 times better. And what I realized, for the ones that really changed, and I'm not saying 10 times better over like 50 years. I'm saying they got 10 times better in like 10 years. Is that they had this commonality. And the commonality that I thought I was seeing was that they had leapfrogged stuff. In other words, they didn't grow linearly. They were growing linearly, and then somehow the country figured out how to just leapfrog and skip forward into the future. And this concept of leapfrogging is really an important one to get. I'm sure most of you have heard about it before, but the most common one is this idea, right? Like, there was this time period where we invented the telephone. We started putting in all these landlines into the ground. It was incredibly expensive. And the U.S. did this in an extraordinary way, and it allowed the U.S., this new communication, allowed the U.S. to move at a pace that other countries could not possibly keep up with. Because prior to the phone, it took a really long time to do anything. And then the U.S. got formed, even like 100 years, 200, 150 years, 100 years afterward. I mean, if you want to send a message from, say, Washington, D.C. to Boston, I mean, you have to write a note and give it to somebody on a horse and then wait 3 months. In fact, the White House, if the White House wanted to send a message to somebody in Boston, they would give it to 3 people because one of them, might get married on the way or get a job, and then the note would never even make it. And so they would give it to 3 different people who would then ride on the horses. And so this development was extraordinary. And it's systemic, and so everything became faster. And so this concept of leapfrogging is this idea, especially in developing countries, where you can move yourself forward by leaping over these legacy technologies, right? And this case of the landline, the cell phone thing. And so I was thinking to myself, I get it, right? Like you do this, you just put a few of these around, and you hand out the cell phones, and then you never have to build the landlines. I mean, it's like $10,000 for one of these things. And so I started to ask myself, well, what if we thought through all of the technologies, all of the things that a country could leapfrog today? And are the Mann brothers here? Ah, cool. Yeah. So Mick and Shane Mann, they put on the Singularity Summit in South Africa. And I got inspired by this because I'd been to South Africa a few times, and I was asking them what the main issues were, and they're like, "Oh, we got a lot of issues, blah blah. How do we catch up? How do we leap forward? We're leading in South Africa, but we're kind of behind in the rest of the world." And I was like, "Yeah, maybe this idea would work." So I put together this kind of customized presentation for them, and they put on a huge. I mean, it's just a fabulous event. I don't know how many people were there. Yeah, 1,500. Yell it out! I can't hear you. Ah, cool, yeah. Right, and so the topic was, what are the 20 things that South Africa could do to leapfrog other countries? And I think we really liked it, right? Because, this it's different for every country. And so it worked out really well, though. And I found it to be a fascinating thing. And so we did it, too, in Thailand, and we did a customized thing in Thailand. And I was going to do that for you here. Except to go through 20 things, it takes like a little more than like an hour. It takes at least a couple hours to go through it. I was thinking, well, we could do through a sample of them. But what I realized was something that was even more important than that. And that's what I want to kind of talk about today and run through with you. And let me walk you through, though, just one of them, just so you get the general idea. I won't walk you through 20. I'll walk you through one. So one of them, the number 2 one, is leapfrogging currency, right? And so you think about currency, because currency is the money. Now you leapfrog money, it's systemic. It's like the phone. It's like communication. It's systemic. You get this unbelievable benefit everywhere. So that's one of those things. And most of those things, those 20 things, they're all systemic. You leapfrog just one of them, and your country will change, guaranteed that. So I was thinking about this money thing, and I had just had this experience, actually, in South Africa. Not South Africa, but Zimbabwe, because I went for this tour with 3 of the other SU faculty members to Zimbabwe. And when I landed at the airport in Harare, I get the best deal of my life. No kidding. With $20, I bought 100 million Zimbabwe dollars. Now I want you to think how this happens. What had to have occurred in all the years before for a government to actually have to print a $100 million note? There's a story there, which I know all of you are bright enough to do the reverse engineering of this story to recognize what happened for them to print a $100 million note, which I was now buying for $20. And 10 minutes later, I was so upset because Raymond McCauley, he here? Raymond, you here today? One of our faculty members talked to you maybe about biology. 10 minutes after me, for $10, bought a $100 trillion note. And I suddenly realized I'd been ripped off. See, this money thing is an interesting thing. And it's not just a thing that gets broken in a country, because I'll walk you through it. Things can be broken. See, the world moves forward so fast that if you don't do anything, you're actually moving backward. It doesn't take bad leadership or bad management to put you in a bad place. It just takes being the same. So, myself, another faculty member, Brad Templeton, and one of our staff members, Aaron Frank, we get this call to give a talk in Singapore. And so I prepare this talk for Singapore. And we fly down to Singapore. And I get there in Singapore, and we get into the room, and I realize that it's not a group of Singaporeans. It's actually a group of South Africans. And it's for this sort of 3-digit billion-dollar company in South Africa. And it's sort of the CEOs of all of their divisions. And they're all here because they just pick, somewhere in the world, and they just happen to pick Singapore. So none of us, we're not really prepared to give this talk. And so we kind of scramble, and we do some other stuff, and we do a talk anyway. And I'm looking on the agenda that morning, and I find out that Nicolas Sarkozy, who's he'd just come off of being the French president, talks right after me. And so I say to Aaron, I'm just like, hey, did you know that Nicolas Sarkozy speaks right after me? And Aaron's like, no, that's not possible. It's probably a different Nicolas Sarkozy. I was like, no, I think it's like the real Nicolas Sarkozy. He's like, no, I can guarantee you it's not the same guy. It's going to be some other guy that just has the same name. And as we're arguing about this, Nicolas Sarkozy walks up with these 4 bodyguards. And I say, well, there he is. And he looks over, and he's wondering what we're talking about. And then they get in the elevator, and then Aaron tries to get in the elevator with them, and that didn't work out too well. But Nicolas Sarkozy comes down, and he gives this talk right after me to this group of South Africans. And they had paid him a very large sum to come because they weren't doing business well in France. And so they wanted him to help them with the problems they were having in France. But that's not the talk he gives. He's got 2 hours, and he gives a different talk. And the talk he gives kind of goes like this. He says, look, you guys are the leader of Africa. You're like the leading country of Africa. And he's like, did you know that your money is pretty much worthless around the world? Like, it's not significant around the world. And he says, you realize that you have an option to be significant. You got 54 countries in Africa. All you have to do is find like 2 or 3 other countries, maybe Kenya, maybe Ethiopia, and connect with them and create a common note. You create an Africa note, not a South African note, an African note. And if you did that, there'd be a whole set of other countries that would jump on that bandwagon, and the African note would matter in the world. He's like, you change the history of your countries forever. And he goes through this for 90 minutes and explains the details of this idea. And then at the end of the 90 minutes, he's got 2 hours. At the end, he says, let me hear your feedback. And so they then spend the next half hour to tell him why that was such a terrible idea. And like, well, that's a terrible idea because clearly, we don't trust the Kenyans, and we don't trust the Ethiopians, and we don't trust. They were all like trust issues. And he listened silently. He's a great listener. He's a great talker too, but he's a great listener. And he listens to it all. And then he's got like 2 minutes left. And he's like, okay, I heard what you said. You think it's a great idea, but you don't trust anyone enough to do it. He's like, well, let me tell you this. After World War II, we didn't trust the Germans. And I'm pretty sure we didn't trust the Germans a lot less than you don't trust any of your neighbors. But we still had the common sense to make a euro. And then he stands up and he walks out of the room. I was like, wow. I was like, wow. I mean, he courageously told them what he knew was probably right. It wasn't what they wanted to hear. It wasn't what they paid him to talk about. In fact, I'm going to guess that they probably didn't invite him back next year. But he courageously told him what was right. And this idea, I think, is a fabulous idea. I mean, it's brilliant. It's utterly obvious that it's brilliant. It's utterly obvious that all of the countries, the 54 countries of Africa, will never matter in terms of their currency in the world unless they do this. I mean, if you go to Africa, and whatever country you're from, if I put American dollars down and then somebody gives me a bunch of change in any country in Africa, I'm going to be a little bit annoyed. Because I know that I'm not going to be able to use that change or convert that change easily anywhere else in the world when I travel. But if it was like the euro, it'd be totally different. And so this is a no-brainer. And so I'm thinking like, okay, let's keep going with this, right? Let's just think about currency. Let's think about the cost of currency. This is fascinating. $1, $2 bill in the US, 4.9 cents. It's 5 cents on the dollar just to print the bill. Just to print the money. Okay? You go a little bit further and then you start thinking about not just the printing aspects of the money, but then the dealing of money. The fact you got to have people that actually count the money. Not the people who print the money count the money. Everyone else who uses the money has to count the money. In fact, there's so many people counting the money that now we have technology and machines that you got to buy in order to count the money. And the money itself is physically valuable. And so you can't just like have it out like sheets of paper, right? You gotta buy like a cash register that's like a safe in order to store the money. And then if you have a few cash registers, you collect up the money from the cash registers, and then it's even more valuable, and then you have to buy a safe for the more valuable money. And then if you want to move the money, you got to pay somebody to come by with an expensive truck just to move the money. And then it gathers up even more in all these banks all over the place, and then they got to pay to have a big thing of money and a bunch of people. It's like the cost of money is crazy. It's crazy, but it's so distributed that no one knows the real price of it. But it's like nuclear fuel. See, the problem when you do how much a nuclear reactor costs, and you think about the energy cost, is that you say, well, this is how much the reactor costs, and this is how much it costs to operate it. And those numbers, 5 years ago, not today, 6 years ago, used to be kind of equivalent to the price of, say, coal or solar. And so it made sense to buy nuclear reactors. But then somebody figured out that you also have to protect the nuclear spent fuel forever. Like for the next 10,000 years. And when you do the sort of forward net present value of that, it's absurd, the cost. It's unbelievable. Like there's no way, as much as I love nuclear, there's no way when you actually figure out the whole cost of it that it ever works out. It stopped working out like 14 years ago. And so you got to do this math. And when you do the math, it doesn't work out like this. It works out totally different. So it should be obvious that maybe doing something like a cryptocurrency might be a good thing. And cryptocurrencies today have been one of the most attempted hacked at things that we've ever created. I mean, there's never been more of a honeypot for hackers than cryptocurrency. Because it's worth so much. And they've tried desperately to hack it. And they can't hack the blockchain itself because it's just that secure. But they can maybe like hack into your particular, account on your laptop or a particular, vendor's account, and that has actually happened. But the blockchain is secure. And so you start thinking about, well, shouldn't we just move to the blockchain? And you look at the numbers, it's really fascinating. Look at this. Number of blockchain wallet users worldwide. It's only like 25 million people. I mean, you do better math on this, it's crazy. Only about 1,000 people own 40% of the world's Bitcoins. That's like 100 million per person. I mean, it's unbelievably small numbers. And what it means is that if you're a country and you decided to go to a cryptocurrency, whether you created it yourself or whether you used an existing one, it would be the most adopted cryptocurrency in the world. You could immediately make it the most popular cryptocurrency in the world. In fact, you look at this list, I mean, really, you got to get down to like Burkina Faso. I didn't even know that was a country, actually, until I was looking at this thing. Cote d'Ivoire. I mean, you got to really get down low on this list to get to like 25 million people. Which means that probably for everyone in this room, you're in a country that if your country adopted a cryptocurrency, you would just have the biggest cryptocurrency in the world. It would be immediately accepted and adopted. And then you start doing the analysis of this. You do the analysis, I won't go through it, but we started doing the analysis for Thailand about how positioned are you to go cashless, what's the digital evolution index for you, how does the digital money readiness index work for you? And we can do this for any of your countries. You can do this, and you can actually see like how it plays out. And the way it plays out is it becomes absolutely obvious that if a country moved to a cryptocurrency, everything changes. They leap forward into the future. And because it's systemic, everything leaps forward with it, like landlines and cell phones. But you say, well, this hasn't been done before. Clearly we don't want to be the first one. It's like, no, there's been countries, they've actually moved to the blockchain already. It's crazy. I'll give you the details of this one. Estonia. 10 years ago, Estonia gained the unenviable title of being the first in the world to experience a nationwide cyber attack. I mean, literally, they didn't lose any data, but literally the entire nation was being slammed, and they just decided, let's just scrap it all and start fresh. And they scrap it all, and literally they put the entire country on the blockchain. Almost all public services in Estonia are digitized and accessed through the secure digital identities. And every citizen and resident in Estonia is on the blockchain. And as an example, Estonians can log into their own medical records using the blockchain and see exactly which medical professionals have done the same and when. And so any government official who accesses your data without a good reason can be challenged and prosecuted. They can be challenged and prosecuted because the blockchain is so good, it'll absolutely prove without a doubt that they looked at it. It's that good. And so it's obvious that we should go to it. Now, how many countries, though, have gone to it? One, Estonia. And I'm thinking to myself, why haven't the other countries gone to it? Because the countries, when they finally decided, we're going to the cell phone, and they went to the cell phone, for the first country that did it was really hard. It was a hard decision. But once somebody had done it, and once the others saw the advantages of success, then they all piled on really quick. And then they kind of regretted not doing it a lot earlier. And this is unquestionably true for this too. And when you analyze it, when you look at it, the only possible thing that makes sense is that people are afraid. And they're afraid for a lot of different reasons. But most of the time, really, it's just the fear. And if it's the political environment, which is greatly responsible for the country issue, if it's the political environment, the leaders are afraid that somehow things might not go well. And then they might not get elected. And so they're fearing their own election. You literally look through it and it's this details of fear. In fact, I'll go further than that. If you look at any of them, it's the same reason they don't get adopted. It's a common reason. It's an underlying reason. You can look at all the details of why it's not getting adopted, but it's always this same thing, which is the fear. Let's do another one. This is the one I think about a lot. Not why is my country, but why is my world not 10 times better? Why aren't we 10 times better? I mean, literally, we got all these problems. And I'm thinking to myself, how we end up with these problems? I'm super impressed, by the way, by the United Nations. I mean, you want to talk about a highly bureaucratic political organization? I mean, this is it. And for 70 years, their mission has been only one thing: stop World War III. And you know what? They have done an incredible job on that. You got to give them credit. They have done an incredible job. And somewhere, several years ago, actually greatly, some Singularity University people here, very much responsible for this kind of thing, actually got kind of involved. And we were able to actually get the United Nations to disrupt itself. And now they're about those 17 Sustainability Development Goals. They still have the mission to stop World War III, but they've disrupted themselves. They're all about the Sustainability Development Goals. So I'm telling you this, if the United Nations can disrupt itself, you have no excuse. There is nothing that I could think of that is more difficult and less likely to have been able to disrupt itself than them. And they did. But I'm still challenged because these problems haven't been going away. And I've been looking at and examining them and thinking, how can we still have people starving? Because, by the way, we've had enough food to feed everyone on the planet easily, like 1.5 times over, for at least 70 years. So how do we not fix this problem? So I take some time. I see Kun Al-Sud, he's here, he's one of the people. And so he helped the UN to start really thinking about this, right? And so we do this whole set of discussions with people at the UN. And the focus and the issue is this. We don't have a shortage of food. That's not the problem. It's a leadership problem. The reason we have 17 world problems, most of them bigger than more than 1 billion people in the world suffering from, isn't because we don't have the right technology. It's not because we're short on materials or anything else. It's a leadership problem. We don't have the right structure of leadership to govern the world, to fix these problems. And so our mission was, hey, let's get them to get one person that's actually responsible for each of the problems. I mean, that's obvious to me. There clearly should be one person in the world who is responsible and accountable for making sure that everyone in the world gets fed. And so we're thinking, maybe that's a bit of a stretch, make them accountable. So let's make it easy at first. Let's just try and get one person to be responsible for making sure everyone in the world gets fed. This is a no-brainer to me. So we have this meeting, and sure enough, we brief this, and the president, the prime minister of Estonia stands up and says, we're never going to do that. It makes no sense at all for us to let the UN start having power, and shuts it down. Now I'm realizing to myself, if the prime minister of Estonia, the most advanced digital country in the world, says this is a bad idea, I can guarantee it everybody else is going to think it's a bad idea too. This thing's dead in the water. This is a big problem. And I'm thinking to myself, well, what is behind this problem? What is the essence of the problem? And the answer is the same, which is this fear. This fear that the UN would start to govern the world. Now, whether or not that's true, my guess is that by having one person responsible to fix the problems, that would not like give the UN like that much power to be controlling anything that anyone cared about much in the world. But the fear prevents it. Let's do another one. Whoops. Why isn't my country 10 times bigger? Say, is there another clicker that has a back button? Hey, thank you. Oh, that's cool. Why isn't my country 10 times bigger? Company. I mean, this is a good question to ask. I mean, you just went through a 3-day conference here saying be 10x, grow 10x. And some of you came a couple years ago and we said the same thing, grow 10x. Are you 10x yet? Because if you're not 10x yet, you got to ask this question. Why am I not 10 times as big? And this is something I spent a lot of time thinking about. And there's a lot of things you can look at. There's a lot of different, I mean, it's the same thing. A lot of complexities, a lot of details, a lot of levers, a lot of measurables. And it's a hard problem to answer. And I've come down now to realize that there's only like 4 answers. And it's actually all 4. And it's literally that simple. You can forget about, our, return on assets isn't quite high enough and we don't have, enough of the salespeople and we, blah, 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 blah. The simplicity of it is it comes down to just 4 things. And one of them is this. One of them is that you're trying to go 10x with good employees, but not great ones. I mean, that's a painful truth. You forget all the details. Great employees figure stuff out. I mean, there's a difference. I'm not talking average or bad employees versus good employees. I'm talking good versus great employees. And you can, you look at the details of how people compare it. I mean, these are all like average versus great, successful versus unsuccessful. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking purely about this bigger concept that they're great employees. And you've got to be able to figure that out. And you get into the detail of why don't we have great employees? And I think there's a common answer. And the common answer looks a little bit like this. See if that's cool. Let's sort of start again. Looks a little like this. See, if you want to train a dolphin to do flips, let's say you want a dolphin that does flips. Dolphins, it's kind of cool. I learned that they can actually do like a triple flip in the air. How do you get a dolphin that does that? How do you get a dolphin to do that? Because there's only 2 ways. You either take the time to train the dolphin to do flips, or you buy a dolphin that does flips. That's the only 2 ways. And the bizarre and challenging aspect of this, when I realized with companies, is that they don't do either. They don't do either. Because dolphins that do flips are expensive. And dolphins that don't do flips, and you want to train them to do flips, it takes a really long time. And they don't do either. And so they end up with good employees and not great ones. And they do that because they fear, they're afraid to spend the money for the good employees. Or they're afraid to take out all the time required to do that. And the second thing is innovation. If you don't do innovation, you're not getting anywhere. I mean, clearly you cannot go 10x doing the same thing. Otherwise, you'd already be 10x. The third thing is connected to the first thing, which is the secret to getting great employees is not just paying the money, but it's having this culture. having a culture to attract employees. In fact, if you don't have a great culture, you will not be able to attract great employees, because great employees won't go to a place that has a bad culture because they have a choice. Good employees won't mind. And you look at the internal culture and the external culture, and you basically realize that companies that have good employees and not great employees have a weak culture. I don't want to say a bad culture, because cultures are just different, and so they're different for different people. But you can definitely have a weak culture. And wherever you find a weak culture, you will find a weak leader. They're hand in hand. You can't escape it. Now, I know that many of you are leaders, and you're thinking to yourself, what did he just say? But the only reason I think that you have weak leaders is that they're afraid. And they're afraid too. They're afraid of a whole lot of things, actually. In fact, that is, I think, almost the definition. Good leaders fear all kinds of things. But great leaders, I've learned, fear only one. Great leaders fear mediocrity. And that's how you can tell the difference really quickly. And this chain of events of mediocrity isn't so much in their performance, but it's in their character. Which means if you want to fix the problem, you got to take the time to train the dolphin. It's not an easy fix. It's not, hey, just hire more salespeople. Hey, just make a better product. Hey, just do the innovation better. Hey, get a better return on investment. Give me a better return. It's not one of those levers. It's this lever. And this lever takes time. So let me ask you a harder one. How come you're not 10 times better? I mean, I know we all ask the question, how come my organization is not 10 times better? How come you're not 10 times better? What's stopping that? I mean, you figure that out, and the rest of this stuff is going to cascade. And here's the bad news. The bad news is that all the technology in the world isn't going to fix that problem. Not only will it not make you necessarily 10 times better, but you're still going to be afraid. And I can guarantee it that it is the fear that prevents the success, that prevents you from going 10x. And I can't even pinpoint the fear because there are so many of them. And my belief now is that when you really examine them, it's actually just the fear of the fear. It's not the fear of necessarily being fired, say, or the fear of not doing so well, or the fear of success. I've learned that it's just the fear of the fear. Now, this is a weird thing, but in any talk I give, I don't even like really cats in a way, but I do always show a cat video. But I'll show you this cat video because you'll see what I'm talking about, the fear of the fear. We'll see if it'll play. Is there sound? Sound? AV, is there sound? I guess not. All right, we'll go without sound. You'll still get the idea without sound. Oh, now we got sound. Fear the fear. Let me walk you through something. True story. Farallon Islands, fascinating trip. You go on, you go out on a boat and you get a shark cage. And you get to actually see, I don't know, are you familiar with these Farallon Islands? They're like 27 miles off the coast of San Francisco. Remote set of islands. About 100 great whites hang out there. And you can actually get on a boat and go out to these and visit them. And, you know, one of the things we talk about is if you're really afraid of something, you face your fear. And if you get in one of these cages, like literally, you can like face your fear. And clearly, we might not do it this way, but you can get a cage, and the cage will protect you. And so I used to think that was kind of true until I sort of like looked into this a little bit more. I'll show you this video. Here you go.
There we go.
You can see how this cage protects the person from the great white.
Oh my God.
The great white just slipped into the cage. And now the great white is thrashing around inside of the cage with the scuba diver in the cage. Oh, there we go.
Was there anybody in there?
Somebody in the cage? Yes, somebody's in the cage. Somebody's in the cage. Oh my God. It has to be Ming. It's Ming.
He lives. He survives it.
Okay.
Now, the very shocking thing is, I'm sure he's pretty afraid. But there's another guy in the cage right next to him that they've sort of forgotten about. It takes a little while. Gray whites are they're the apex predator. True story. About 5 years ago, gray whites are the top of their pyramid. Even killer whales are afraid of great whites. Because gray whites, I mean, literally, their skin is made out of these sharp scales. It's just the teeth. And yet, they saw and observed a great white that had been held upside down by a killer whale. Actually, two of them. And they watched it holding it upside down. And sharks go through this weird thing where when you turn them upside down, they actually can't really move. And so it held it there for 15 minutes until it drowned. And then the other great white actually came up and ripped its kidney out, and then they both left. And they've done sort of a whole analysis, and you can watch this. It's on the National Geographic. It's an amazing set of footage. But what they've realized is that at least these two great whites, these two killer whales have learned how to kill great whites. And what they know is one of them slams the great white, the other one comes up, turns it upside down, they hold it on the surface, and then one of them will rip the kidney out, and it's over and done. And they've learned that. And through this intelligence, they've actually learned. In other words, they've solved the problem through this intellect. And they believe dolphins, great whites, they actually have a brain-to-body mass ratio that's not that different than human beings. So they're really brilliant animals. And these great whites, unlike others, right after this happened, by the way, all of the great whites on the Farallon Islands disappeared. And 2 weeks later, one of the great whites had an electronic tag on it, and it surfaced in Hawaii. And it sent the data, and the data said that on the day of this attack, that great white dove 500 feet and swam all the way to Hawaii before it surfaced. And there are no great white rides anymore, because those great whites are still gone. In fact, now there's a team that's actually thinking of trying to make shark repellent by using it on these, using dead great white meat as a way to repel great whites, because great whites are literally that afraid. And the question is, the orca is the apex predator. How many people have died from orcas? Anybody know? 0. Not one. And so you're talking about an intellect level that is so high that it can be particular. It's not a ferocious animal. And you look at this detail, and this is a crazy quote. Contrary to what most people say, the most dangerous animal in the world is not the lion or the tiger or even the elephant. It's a shark riding on an elephant's back, just trampling and eating everything they see. Jack Handy. My belief is this. While it's true that you can develop your offenses and your defenses, if you want to stop fearing things, there's only one answer. And it's true in companies, it's true in countries, it's true in individuals. And it's just this simple. You got to grow your compassion. Because the only thing that brings you through fear is a compassion. You can't just defeat fear by thinking about it. You can't even defeat fear through intellect. You want better customers? You love your customers. You want fanatical, crazy customers? Stop loving your product. Stop loving your technology. Love your customers. Apple has great products, but Apple loves their customers, and they please their customers. And as a result of pleasing and loving their customers, they are now the first trillion-dollar company in the world. My belief is if you looked at any leader in the world, you will see this commonality. That great leaders don't have just a better vision for the future. They have this single quality that differentiated them, which is that they were not afraid. And my very strong belief is that the most powerful 4 words that we can learn to answer this question as to why are we not 10 times better or not 10 times bigger is simply the words, I am not afraid. Because you can link every problem in innovation, every problem in a company, every problem in a leader, every problem in a country to the exact same thing, which is that people are afraid and they're afraid to try something new. And if you looked at the detail of it, the most powerful thing I think that you'll learn in a world of disruption is simply to be courageous. And that may sound very simple, but I'm telling you, the simplicity of it is the reason that we have the continuing problems. You be courageous with innovation, with your life, as a leader, with your organization, to your country, to your world. But most of all, you be courageous with the compassion. I've had the opportunity to see lots of people win medals of courage, and never once have I seen them win it simply because they wanted to be courageous or they wanted to win a medal. It's always the same reason. They love their fellow soldier, they love their family, they love their country, they love an individual, and they do it for that reason. We're not 10 times bigger or better primarily because of one single thing, our fear. And my belief is that when we have twice the compassion, we will have 10 times the courage. And we can be 10 times bigger. And there is a butterfly effect that happens here. And the butterfly effect simply says, and it's true in all chaos and in all theory, that small things make huge differences. You find there's a huge hurricane right now, level 5 hitting Hawaii. You reverse that playback back of that video on the supercomputer models that we use of weather in the world, and you will trace it back to one tiny little wind somewhere that started and then escalated and escalated and escalated until you get a storm. See, each time a person stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. I'll wrap up with this. Because many of us think we have to do great things. And it's just not true. And what I've realized is this, because I looked a lot at Martin Luther King's work, and it's an extraordinary set of works that he did changing the world. But all of his works were motivated by one person. And it was a woman. It was a woman who chose to sit in a different place on a bus. I got to say it again because it's such a critical point. A woman changed the world because of where she chose to sit one day on a bus. My hopes for you are that you leave here today remembering and realize this truth, that the biggest problems we have together, whether it's the world, whether it's our country, whether it's our company, whether it's ourselves, are to take a look at these things that we have a fear over and figure out how to get through these fears. And without that, we will never be 10x. And the minute we can overcome these fears, they release the brakes because they are the symptoms of all of the other things that are just the effects. I thank you very much for the last 9 years. I hope you had a wonderful conference here the last few days. And I wish you the very best and look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thanks for that. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you, my friend.
Nice to see you.
David Roberts, everyone.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much. Thanks for that.
Thank you, my friend.
Nice
Great to have you here.